So we're going to hear from Anthony Albanese today. Does he need to be careful about over-promising? I mean, a lot of the issues in aged care in particular, they're not overnight fixes.
No one's suggesting they are overnight fixes, Tom, but the most important statement that will be made today by Anthony Albanese is that a Labor government would take responsibility for aged care because it actually is the responsibility of the Commonwealth government. And that's what we failed to see on the part of Scott Morrison and his government up until this moment in time. I mean, there is no plan being put forward by the Morrison government, but before that, there's not even a sense of responsibility being taken by the Morrison government for what is going on in aged care facilities around the country and obviously particularly in Victoria. And I think there are thousands of people around the country, and particularly in Victoria, who are crying out for the federal government to take responsibility and articulate a plan and to explain what has gone wrong. Now, the aged care minister will be standing up in the Senate in a few minutes. I really hope that he does those things, takes responsibility, starts articulating a plan, explains how things have gone wrong. And if he isn't doing that, he should resign.
Well, on the call for him to resign, I mean, Labor's saying he should resign or be sacked anyway. They point to responsibility taken away from the minister, saying there must be a lack of faith. What's your focus now? Do you focus more on the issues? Can you keep up that call for him to go, even as people are very concerned within this sector? Does that sort of further erode confidence in society?
Look, it is about the issues for sure, but we need a minister who actually can grasp those issues and make a difference and put in place a plan which gets the aged care sector past the coronavirus crisis. But yeah, it is the issues. I mean, for the thousands of people who are in aged care, working in aged care, or who have families and loved ones in aged care, what we want to see is the Commonwealth government to take responsibility to explain what has gone wrong. And I think there actually is a sense of understanding that not everything is going to go right in these pretty extraordinary circumstances with this pandemic. But what you need to know is that someone is standing up and grabbing this thing and taking responsibility so that that we can get past it. But right now, we've got more than 120 facilities in Victoria where there are active cases of coronavirus at the moment. The Prime Minister is essentially saying that beyond 4 facilities, you've got nothing to worry about. I mean, it beggars belief. And it is an absolute slap in the face to everybody who has a loved one in one of those facilities.
So if Richard Colbeck, though, should go over the aged care mistakes, who should go over Victoria's handling of hotel quarantine?
Well, that is a matter which is being looked at by a judicial inquiry. But, I mean, let me make this point if you want to make those comparisons. Daniel Andrews has stood up every single day and completely accepted responsibility for what's gone on. He has said that the buck stops with him. He has answered every question that has been put to him in press conferences that on occasions have gone for hours. But that is in stark contrast to what we've seen from the Prime Minister, who is essentially pointing the finger at everybody but himself and saying, bar 4 facilities, you've got nothing to worry about. I mean, that is astonishing. And for people who have loved ones in every one of the 120 facilities around the country where there is an active case, to hear that from our Prime Minister is a complete disgrace.
But on the responsibility here, it's fine to say the buck stops with me. There are, at the moment, no consequences. Surely this mistake, it shut down the economy. Victorians, Melburnians in particular, under harsh lockdown for at least 6 weeks. And even the deaths you're talking about can also be at least in part attributed to the fact that the virus got out. Now, doesn't someone need to be accountable for that?
Totally. And I've got no doubt that
doesn't someone need to lose their job over it?
Well, in the fullness of time, there will be complete account held in Victoria for mistakes. And what you've got is a government and a premier who stood up and said mistakes have been made. This virus got into the country to start with. Let's be clear about that. And our border is clearly the responsibility of the federal government. And so for the federal government now to be saying, look, we're responsible for aged care, but in Victoria it's actually to do with all the background factors there, which is why there's been a problem. Yeah, that doesn't cut the mustard, because ultimately this virus comes to Australia across an international border, which the Commonwealth government is responsible for. At the end of the day, what we want is for the Commonwealth Government to take responsibility for aged care around the country in whatever setting it appears in.
Okay.
That includes in Victoria. And that's and we need to see the Prime Minister stand up and take that responsibility.
I understand your point, and that's what Labor continues to push for, and plenty of people have asked this of the PM. But just to clarify your view there in Victoria, someone should be held responsible, i.e. losing their job over hotel quarantine. Once that the particular responsibility can be ascertained, someone should be losing their job. You think that's fair enough?
Look, at the end of the day, that is a matter that's going to play out within Victorian politics. As a federal MP from this state, all I can say to you is I look at a Premier who is taking rescibility each and every day, and I think that stands in stark
But there's
contrast to the
responsibility
behaviour
and
of our Prime
consequence,
Minister.
isn't there?
Sure. And I think no one could suggest that the Victorian government isn't bearing consequences for what has played out. But at the same time, they've also stood up and grabbed hold of this issue.
Has copped any consequences here.
They've also stood up and grabbed hold of this issue. And, you know, I'm touching wood as I say it, but the infection rate is going down. And there is a sense in which we're moving through this. That has not occurred in terms of accepting responsibility by the Commonwealth Government when it comes to aged care, and that's what we need to see. And if you want to align it with Victoria, then let's get the Prime Minister doing those press conferences every day as well.
Just a final topic, and a very interesting one today. So the federal government wants power to be able to counsel collaborations between universities or states and foreign powers where they deem it's not an appropriate one. They're pushing national interest. What's Labor's view on this?
Well, we obviously need to have a look at the legislation, and when we get that, we haven't got it at the moment, we'll have a good look at it and form a view. I think it is important that I think it's important, first of all, that the way in which we engage with the world is something that is managed by the Commonwealth Government. That's its power and its responsibility, so I understand that. And what our national interest is and how it's given best expression in terms of the way we relate to countries around the world is actually a matter of expertise which resides in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. I do think we shouldn't forget this government's got its own form in relation to agreements. I mean, it was this government that at the end of 2017, under Trade Minister Chobo, signed its own BRI agreement with China. It was this government which signed a lease agreement in respect of the Port of Darwin, which put it in the hands of the Chinese state-owned enterprise. So, you know, I think the government itself has its own issues in relation to agreements, but we'll have a good look at the legislation and certainly we understand the role of the Commonwealth Government in these affairs.
All right, well, perhaps we'll go into more detail once that detail is available. Richard Marles, appreciate your time.
Thanks, Tom.